Good morning, everybody. My name is Michael Claessens from Regional Development Australia. Just before we start, some practical matters. We want to just make sure that everyone gets a chance to benefit the most from this webinar business forum. For those who are unfamiliar with Zoom, if you go to the bottom of your screen, run your cursor to the bottom, you'll see a number of instruction icons there: mute, stop video, the number of participants, chat, share screen, record, reactions, etc. If you want to ask a question, because we have so many people online, we'd like you to ask that question via the chat mechanism. So you go to that sort of chat icon on the bottom and hit chat, and you can just type in a question. We'll gather those questions up, and at the end of each presentation and during the panel session, I'll relay those questions to individuals. Please, in the panel session, I will remind you at panel to identify the panelists that you are asking the specific question of, or if there's no specific person, just the question. After each presentation, there'll be a short period for questions as well. If I miss it, please repeat it to make sure that I do have my colleague here gathering those questions up as well. So hopefully we'll make sure everyone gets a good hearing. So with no further ado, I call on the Chair of Regional Development Australia, ACT, Ross, to start with a note of welcome. Just a bit of background on Ross. He serves currently as the Chief Executive Officer of the Royal Australian Mint. He has served also as the Chief Executive Officer of Dysol Australia Proprietary Limited, Chief Executive of the Australian Capital Tourism Corporation, and prior to that, he had several management positions, general manager positions with Lockwood Australia, Smorgon, Ansett Australia, and the ACT government. So over to you, Ross.
Thank you, Michael, and welcome to everybody on what is a challenging environment, and clearly not just about the world we live in, but the technology we're trying to work with as well. On behalf of my colleagues in the RDA ACT, and a few of them are online, welcome to this particular webinar. It's an important occasion because the SERREE has been such a significant program for the RDA ACT. We've described our role as being the tutelage, or the facilitators of this program, and in no small measure to the great work from Liz Fitch, you'll hear from in just a moment. But also marks a new beginning of a new phase, which in months to come will see a new renewable energy hub emerge and new horizons for SERREE and its membership. So the purpose of today's event is to recognise the important role that SERREE has played in the development of renewable energy here in the ACT and the region, brief the industry on how, and draw out industry views on the direction of the renewable energy policy in the ACT, examine best practice in industry hubs and clusters to benefit the industry, and draw out what will best meet the needs of business going forward. And I guess if you take all those into consideration, the importance of doing so in this very significant period of change, and as a result of COVID, but also the incredible spectacular disasters we've had impact on the ACT and the region over the last 6 months, bushfires, massive hailstorms. It seems like this is an important initiative that must continue. The ACT government, of course, has set itself a very demanding targets for sustainability, which is 100% of renewable energy by 2045 and net zero emissions. We know there are also threats to global supply chains, and climate change means placing the ACT very much in a position where it becomes self-reliant. Whether in the new renewable energy space, or in the case of the ACT RDA or RDA ACT in the future, focus on food and water supply. Bringing industry together is an important part of what we do, and ensuring that we provide the opportunity for areas of competitive advantage in the ACT and region to actually be facilitated to opportunities. SERREE has certainly been one of those, and it's been recognised not just within the RDA network itself, but across governments that this has been a very successful hub program. So I'd like to welcome some of our speakers and panellists. Michael will provide a more detailed bio in just a moment. The first of those speakers in a moment will be Liz Fitch. She was the Executive Director, as many of you would know, of RDA-ACT, and really the originator and architect of SERREE. Liz's input is important because really she gives us a retrospective on how it was constructed, how it's been working, and I guess from our point of view, to give us an insight into the things that actually made it work so successfully that can be useful going forward. Other speakers will be Aoife Foulkes-Williams, also who's an expert in this in industry hub formation. John Grimes, CEO of Smart Energy Council. Simon Corbell, who is the Deputy Chief Minister, or previous Deputy Chief Minister, Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and now works for Energy Estate. Jean McLeans, who is started as Executive Director, Climate Change and Sustainability for the ACT Government, and we'll also hear, of course, from Michael, who is our CEO and has been facilitating effectively this particular forum. Finally, we also have the rest of the ACT Government and Renewable Energy team online. I suspect there are many other groups. I haven't seen how many we actually have, but this team includes people like Daniel and Hugo, Tracy and Olivia, who have been very instrumental in helping SERREE to get to where it has got to today. SERREE's success has in no small measure been due to their support and flexibility in helping to deliver for our membership. And finally, our interactions with them have always been, as you'd expect, very professional and very effective. So thank you to the ACT Government representatives who have helped with the facilitation of SERREE. Can I thank also Michael and Suzanne for organising today. This is not an easy thing to do, and if you haven't done one before, I have done a few. I've always found it quite challenging, but you've done a great job, Michael and Suzanne, and we'll hopefully we'll get the benefit from it. And I think I can see Sylvia Tulloch, an old colleague of Dysol. Hi, Sylvia, how are you? Nice to see you. So without any further ado, again, thank you, Michael and Suzanne, and I hand over to Michael, who will now take us through the introduction of the other speakers. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Ross. We'll next move to a presentation by Liz, and Ross has mentioned her background as previous Executive Director for RDA and the architect of SERREE. Liz established the whole hub many years ago, and she'll detail that. What people don't probably know is that previous to RDA, she was a drought relief counsellor for the region, and her previous career was in professional writing, the media and public relations. And Liz currently manages a primary production enterprise, a farm with a family in the Burra Valley. So Liz, over to you, and if you can unmute yourself, we'll look forward to your presentation. And questions, just to remind everyone again, for those who've joined late, questions please by the chat mechanism, which is on the bottom of your screens, and I'll hold those questions if there are any to the end of Liz's presentation. Over to you, Liz.
Thank you. Is this technology working?
No, working well.
So, good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. I'm just wanting to get my presentation up, Michael, and would appreciate a heads up from you or Suzanne how I get that there.
Not seeing it yet. Do you hit share screen?
Yep.
Seeing it. What, Suzanne, can you?
Just need to select the, once you click the share button, Liz, just click on the presentation itself, and then the little blue button on the bottom right just pop up.
Liz, in those PowerPoint slides up in the top left-hand corner, there's a little icon that says play from start. If you click on that, it should then take up the whole screen.
Okay. My internet provider is saying I have a flaky system, so the timing is terrible, but we live in Borough and that's what it is.
Sounds and looks good. Just need to get.
I'm relaunching now. Sorry, everybody. Technology is not my thing. I was much better at managing RDA, ACT, and SERREE than I am at technology. It's still launching. Is there anything I can do in the meantime? So
Liz, have you tried just going from play from start? You're just waiting for it to work.
play from start, yes.
Yep.
I've got, is that
there you
happening?
go. Now it's working. Okay. Off. You're
Fabulous. Okay. Thank you. Apologies, everybody. Okay. So hello and welcome to a SERREE perspective. I'm Liz Fitch. A key component of my work as RDA ACT Executive Director was to manage the $1 Million SERREE initiative from its inception as a good idea in around 2011 through to my retirement in 2018. It's been nostalgic to be back in the world of RDA ACT in recent weeks, once again using words like SERREE and renewable energy, regional economic development, industry cluster, stakeholder engagement, rather than, hey, get back there, dog. It's also lovely to imagine being back amongst you all, the familiar faces of the people who Craig, Matthew and I so enjoyed working with on the SERREE initiative. It worked. So today is about the transition of SERREE to the Smart Energy Hub. But before we let SERREE go, let's look back for a few minutes, celebrate the highs and the lows, the joys and frustrations that were SERREE. SERREE is an acronym for the Southeast Region of Renewable Energy Excellence. It was an initiative led by RDA ACT with a focus on developing the regional economy, growing the emerging local renewable energy industry, and showcasing collaboration, both across the region and across the renewable energy sector. SERREE evolved as a project idea around 2011. What lay behind the idea was recognising the fast-growing renewable energy industry as being a strong competitive advantage of our ACT and surrounding region, with abundant sun, wind and land resources and supporting government policy. The idea also recognised that the industry had the size and capability to drive significant economic development into the region, new jobs, business growth and diversity, and industry investment. But the first key step in getting any project happening is to source funding. Our first coup here was in 2012 when we secured Federal Department of Industry funding to map and scope the needs and capability of the region's renewable energy sector. An exciting beginning. I'm on paper down here. So this funding supported us to map our region's renewable energy resources, to chart the existing state of play of the industry, and to recognise the sector's many regional stakeholders. At this time, we identified our region of renewable energy interest to be the RDA regions of the ACT, the far south coast and southern inland. The mapping showed that we already had some renewable energy infrastructure in the region, including a few solar farms, wind farms, a geothermal installation at Geoscience Australia building, solar thermal at ANU's Big Dish, hydro, snowy hydro, and the potential for wave energy was being explored on the south coast. The mapping work also supported our belief in the potential for economic growth through the development of the renewable energy industry in our region, and also in the value of collaboration across the diversity of stakeholders involved in the region's renewable energy industry. These stakeholders had broad-ranging interests, but all seem strongly committed to renewable energy. Stakeholders included the federal, state, territory and local governments, business and industry proponents, and that's from large multinationals through to small local businesses, research and education institutions, and the communities. We identified the industry cluster model as being the optimal way to progress the industry's development in the region. And discussions with E4 Folks Williams, who you'll be speaking with later in the webinar, helped us to understand and implement the industry cluster concept. Support for the SERREE initiative continued to grow until some years of blood, sweat and tears later, the SERREE industry cluster was formalised in 2014. At this time, the Australian government, through ARENA, along with the New South Wales and ACT governments, joined with industry stakeholders to fund and support the work of the SERREE industry cluster. There's a bit of nostalgia. Here we are, 100+ foundation members celebrating the official launch of the SERREE industry cluster on a memorable spring day at the National Arboretum, November 2014. A priority for the work of SERREE was to establish links across the sector. The focus was especially on linking those working in industry with other sector stakeholders, the governments, the local businesses, researchers, education, and the community. These linkages formed the basis for ongoing communication and collaboration across the sector. So let's look at each one of them. So John Sibley, I don't know if he's out there, but we did a lot of work with him. Opportunities to bring governments and industry together supported policy discussion between them, facilitating a two-way conversation that informed in both directions. Industry could get a better understanding of government policy, whilst also having an opportunity to feed into it. This is an old photo, not a great quality, from the Canberra Times, but you'll remember this, Simon. So around this time, 2015, the ACT government was developing cutting-edge renewable energy policy led by the then Minister for the Environment, Simon Corbell. The 2015 Renewable Energy Industry Development Strategy outlined a pathway for taking the ACT to a 90% by 2020 renewable energy target, and that's since evolved to 100%. The strategy noted that the SERREE industry cluster was a key stakeholder in implementing this policy and, I quote, through facilitating collaboration between industry, research, training, communities and government. I know Simon will also be speaking later in the webinar, and he's best placed to talk you through the intricacies of some of the innovative mechanisms that underpin the strategy, the reverse auction process of bidding for renewable energy delivery, and the Renewable Energy Innovation Fund that drove renewable energy business into the region. It was an exciting time to be in renewable energy. Another important linkage that needed to be made was between large multinational industry developers and our local regional businesses to ensure that projects being built in our region contracted these businesses and employed our local workforce. A favourite case study of just such an important linkage being well made was between a small Goulburn-based company and SERREE member Divels with another member, Pacific Hydro. Divels was a local family-owned civil engineering business, which in just 3 years progressed to being head civil contractor for the Taralga wind farm, expanding their workforce by 48 and investing in 20 pieces of new plant. And Divels credits SERREE with helping them to make the connections that led to this $11.4 million contract. A common lament of industry was their inability to hire local staff who had the skills they'd need to work on large-scale renewable energy projects. SERREE recognised the importance of facilitating connections between industry and the educators to ensure that the skills training being offered met the needs of the industry. We worked particularly closely with the Canberra Institute of Technology in this regard as they developed their Renewable Energy Skills Training Centre and provided a platform for the CIT to officially launch their training centre as part of SERREE's Renewable Energy Day event in 2015. It was also valuable to provide opportunities for researchers and entrepreneurs with opportunities to pitch their products and their services to industry to seek commercialisation of their innovations. We were geographically blessed to work closely with, for example, the ANU's Energy Change Institute, the entrepreneurial local company Dysol with SERREE members, and the Canberra Innovation Network were instrumental in supporting local renewable energy small business development. Another key priority was to give local communities a voice that was heard by industry, thus underpinning sustainable development in our region. And conversely, to help communities to understand the regional economic benefits that could be derived from the industry. SERREE achieved this through such initiatives as developing the Renewable Energy Trail and hosting annual Renewable Energy Days. So over the course of the next 6 years, the SERREE Industry Cluster membership grew exponentially to include more than 1,000 renewable energy stakeholders working in our ACT and surrounding region. These included some of the biggest names in the global renewable energy industry like Infigen and our own Canberra-based Wind Lab, through to many small and varied local businesses. And so, with funding in the budget and a growing membership, the work was on to provide quantifiable benefit to the SERREE network members. Communications. Information is key. An important way to bring benefit to members was through providing communication channels. Ongoings and outgoings SERREE communications included an informative weekly e-newsletters and the dynamic SERREE website. The website was updated daily by Craig to provide regionally relevant renewable energy industry news and job and business opportunities. And this site attracted over 1,000 page views a week. SERREE also hosted a series of well-attended business forums where a variety of speakers presented on what was happening in the industry, who was doing it, where, how, and why. Business forums were followed by networking sessions that became a popular platform for stakeholders to talk informally with each other over a beer and a nibble, to share and discuss industry opportunities and challenges. I've already discussed one of SERREE's most valued roles as helping to broker connections across the sector. This connectivity could be enabled in a variety of ways. Even a 2-minute phone call providing a fresh contact could result in significant flow-on benefits. A listing of SERREE members was formed into a cluster directory, a searchable online listing of over 150 businesses and organisations active in our region's renewable energy industry. This later evolved to form the Canberra Region Renewable Energy Industry Capability Directory. One of my favourites. SERREE's Renewable Energy Trail and Renewable Energy Day initiatives were a type of communication tool, helping to provide a conduit between communities and the renewable energy industry. The SERREE Renewable Energy Trail was a self-guided driving tour, or you could do it as a virtual online experience that consisted of presenting a variety of the region's renewable energy generation sites and providing in-depth site information used by students, local communities, and tourists. Trail sites showcased wind, solar, solar thermal, hydro, geothermal, bioenergy technologies, and battery storage, all within this region, and each featured a trail sign, still there on many of those sites, that presents information on the site and its technology. Here we are at the Googong Dam trail sign on Renewable Energy Day 2016. It's a little bit like Where's Wally in these photographs. You can find me in most of them. Okay, and then in response to numerous requests from the embassies, Austrade and DFAT, SERREE expanded this to host global business delegations on site visits, supporting an agenda to facilitate export opportunities. Renewable Energy Day. SERREE hosted annual Renewable Energy Day events where we took busloads of community members to visit local renewable energy sites. Site managers provided guided tours of the facilities that gave visitors a better understanding of how the technologies worked. Also, people could see for themselves how, for example, a wind turbine looked close up and how it sounded close up. And finally, we developed the SERREE model, which presented our learnings from establishing this $1 million initiative that was SERREE, what worked, what didn't, and why. The SERREE model is a replicable, best practice model for regional scale renewable energy sector development. In conclusion, SERREE was an incredible opportunity to develop our region's economy and the renewable energy sector, to work with many interesting and often wonderful people, and to develop a multifaceted initiative that showcased industry engagement and stakeholder collaboration. Thanks to the RDA ACT committee and staff for encouraging me to take this opportunity to send SERREE off to the Smart Energy Hub with the confidence that its precepts will continue to flourish to serve our region and the renewable energy industry. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks so much, Liz. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Very interesting. I think everybody recognises the hard work that the RDA team, particularly yourself, had put in over that period, and that's a testimony to just how significant an effort that was and how successful it has been and continues to be. I don't think it's a past tense either. I think it's also present and future tense. There was one question that sort of stood out. I think that was one on the energy trail, and it's probably not one for you to answer yourself, and we might hold it, but I'll state it now. And then it goes to the SERREE trail, and you pointed out one at Googong Dam there with the signage around trail locations. So I think that's something we'll take to panel. As in terms of answering that. I certainly know most people will read those signs. I know I do when I've been to some of those locations. And for one community day that we ran after you left, it was the critical bits of information there that are still very, very current and still very helpful. So thank you for that. We'll now move on. And Liz, by all means, I hope you stay online and you'll participate through that.
I will. Yeah.
Great. We'll now move on very quickly to John Grimes. John, who's just going to give a very quick snapshot on Smart Energy Council and what it's been up to. And I think Alethea Marcellus, who's also on the line, will be important to that.
No, fantastic. Thank you, Michael.
By the way, Liz, can you unshare now before we start with John? Take that off.
Done. Yep.
Over to you, John.
Great. Thanks very much, Michael. Really appreciate that. And I'd really like to start by paying tribute to you, Liz, to the whole team at SERREE, who were visionaries back in 2011, looking at the advantages of this region and really positioned this region not just as a national leader, but indeed as an international leader. And a huge amount of work has gone into that. And a whole lot of people were involved and remain involved in that important work. So congratulations, thank you. And I think it was absolutely fantastic job during that period. I might go ahead and just quickly share a couple of slides with you. There'll be a lot more information coming up shortly, or released shortly, not at this event, but going forward, about the new work that the work program that the ACT Renewables Hub will be engaged in. I didn't want to cover that today, that's really to come, but I did want to just quickly introduce the Smart Energy Council. Who are we, and why are we so excited to be involved in this program going forward? So the Smart Energy Council is a peak industry body for the renewables industry. We really cover the whole gamut of different renewable technologies, energy storage at different technologies, different scales, things like electric vehicles, the renewable hydrogen sector, and so forth. We have about 1,000 corporate members across the country. These are our platinum level members, our highest level members. So great local companies like WinLab, very pleased to have as a platinum member, but there are a lot of big developers. So, you know, there's people like Acciona, like Infigen, and a bunch of others, big developers, big financiers. So CBA Super, for example, bringing the superannuation industry. Component manufacturers, so people like Longi Solar, Redback Technology, another great Australian company. Legal firms, people who deal in renewable energy certificates, big consulting firms like KPMG and others. And next tier is sort of the gold level of membership, and you'll see once again a very diverse ecosystem of really substantial international, national and local players. And I think one of the things that I'm really looking forward to doing is providing a bridge, a network between the local industry, local research, local innovation, and these national and international companies, so that we can kind of, if you like, send the technology out of the ACT and attract the best brains and best research to this region. And our silver level members, again, you know, really diverse people like from REAM, hot water systems, UL, the testing and certification laboratories, and a whole bunch of others. I touched on it a second ago. We have a division, Hydrogen Australia. It's actually made up from a network of researchers, government organisations and industry, really focused on the prospect for renewable hydrogen and really framing the debate as the opportunity for Australia to be an energy exporting superpower in the future, but not so much digging up fossil fuels and exporting them, but rather tapping into our abundant natural resources, converting it into renewable hydrogen, then into ammonia and other things to actually take that to the world. So a big vision for, I think, a really bright future. We do a lot of research. We provide a lot of market intelligence reports to the industry. We publish a magazine, the Smart Energy magazine. We've been publishing that in Australia for over 40 years. And that's a quarterly publication, and there'll be a dedicated area in this magazine going to our national and international database, which will focus on the activities of our local industry and making those ongoing connections and keeping the ACT region really in the front of people's minds going forward. We're pretty hard at work at the moment, really advocating for a renewables-led stimulus agenda. So if governments, federal and state, are going to put lots of money into restarting the economy, then what better way to do that than not just activating a bunch of screwdriver-ready and shovel-ready projects to build renewables, but actually give people the legacy of greater competition in the energy sector and lower power bills for the next 25 years to come. So batteries and solar and so forth, getting a double bite at the cherry, if you like, around stimulus. We do a lot of face-to-face activities around the country, you know, including our annual conference where we have over 5,000 delegates attend. And we're, you know, like everybody, very upset, disappointed that that's all been disrupted this year. And so for the first time, our 58th annual conference did not proceed, and unfortunately, it won't happen this year. But we have pivoted very strongly to online content. So we're doing a lot of content online. We ran a national Smart Energy Summit actually a couple of weeks ago and had over 3,500 people join us on that from around Australia. Again, I think there's a really interesting and diverse audience that I think we can help shape and tell the story of this region too, and build that bridge. My final slide is just to introduce Alethea. Alethea is the ACT Renewables Hub Manager. She's a full-time resource that does nothing but focus on building this. And of course, the other members of our team, we've got 11 other full-time staff who will all be involved to some degree in advancing the program. So we're really looking forward to picking up the baton and doing our bit to kind of make sure that this all stays alive, and not just stays alive, but thrives and grows in the future. Thanks very much, Michael.
Thanks so much, John. That was great. Look, we're now set for our main speaker for today, and I'll introduce him. His name is Efel Fuchs-Williams. He's the CEO of Cluster Navigators Limited. As Liz pointed out, he was involved early on in the genesis of SERREE, and he's a person in much demand worldwide as an internationally hub expert, cluster expert. Cluster Navigators itself is acknowledged across 6 continents as leaders in cluster-based economic development. They're active right across all sorts of local economies, all sorts of industries. They train, they empower local developers to how to do it. How do you do it? And what not to do. I think that's probably often more useful than knowing what to do. They support public agencies. I know the Federal Department of Industry rely heavily on Efel's expert advice in some of their programs which support hub development, particularly in exports. And his clients currently involve organisations such as the World Bank, OECD, and various industry and regions in all sorts of places, which we'll hear more about now. So once Efel has got his PowerPoint slide presentation up, we'll look forward to hearing from him. He's from Nelson, New Zealand, and we'll forgive him that. He barracks for the wrong football team and probably the wrong code as well, I'm sure. But we're almost there. Let's just give us a moment to get the presentation up. Efel, can you unmute?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, but how do I am? No. Sorry, I'm just trying to get onto my. Is that working? No. Ah.
That's working. It was a moment ago anyway.
I think I'm getting there.
Yep.
Am I there now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, Michael, thank you. And Liz, thank you for your background there. And I was impressed, Liz, as you were talking, you talked about how you've engaged with 1,000 businesses in the region. Was impressed, John, as you were talking about 5,000 people participating recently in an event. You're talking about scale. And what I want to share with you in setting the scene here a little bit is what other places around the world are doing. And the first place I want to take you to, first place, is the home of Vestas. So Vestas, I'm sure, a company you're all very familiar with. And Vestas have moved their head office from West Jutland to Aarhus on the east coast of Jutland. And Aarhus, a place that calls itself today the capital of wind energy. It's a place that stands proud when it comes to wind energy. Some 90% of Denmark's activity located around Aarhus. It's not just a few companies, it's many companies, as both of you were talking about. 11,000 employees, again, emphasizing a place with scale. One thing I like is the way Aarhus, if you look at the center bit here, central Denmark, the world's tightest wind cluster. And I love the way they talk about a tight wind cluster. And I sense they're talking about tight in the sense of we are geographically close. And most of the businesses that are identified here are within half an hour's drive of each other. so are the R&D centers, so are the training facilities. So it's got a geographic proximity to it. It's tight in terms of geography, but it's also tight in terms of connections. And much of what Liz talked about was we've helped people get to know each other. And that's part of what comes with the tight geography that we see in a place like Aarhus. I like the way Aarhus too, the way the city is engaging in climate action. And I sense a bit like on a broader scale, you are in Canberra as well. So the wind energy clustering initiative is a component within the broader agenda in developing the Aarhus community, the Aarhus economy. We move a little bit north from Jutland to Oslo. Oslo stands proud for renewable energy. Again, a clustering initiative centered on renewables in Oslo. If I go a bit further north, Iceland, I'm pleased to hear geothermal mentioned by Liz. Iceland stands out on a global scale for geothermal. And if I think about the population of Iceland, 350,000 or so roughly the population of Canberra. But a particular competency here, geothermal. And these are the players. And part of what the clustering initiative is doing is helping these players work more closely as a team. And it's not everybody hugging each other within that team. Perhaps there is one group putting in a tender for perhaps a World Bank project in Ethiopia, and there's another group putting in a competing tender. But there's flexible collaboration amongst these organizations. In the bottom right-hand corner, government, it's not one or two, but it's a range of government agencies in Iceland that are part of this. And one of the difficulties often in cluster development is getting whole of government alignment around a particular cluster. It's not that easy in Iceland. It's even more difficult for you in Australia with 3 levels of government. I've talked about the geothermal cluster. Iceland also has an energy clustering initiative. And these 2 initiatives have recently come together to form their renewable energy cluster. Iceland able to say we've got 100+ years of experience. And again, Iceland saying it's geothermal, it's the hydro, it's the district heating capabilities, it's the energy resource. It's a wide range of capabilities, no different to what you're talking about in your corner of Australia. What Belgium is doing is similar too. An initiative here in Wallonia. Wallonia is the part of Belgium south of Brussels, just between Brussels and France. I like the way they talk about their cluster technology of Wallonia, energy, environment, sustainable development. I could take you into a number of other places, taking you very quickly into Aarhus, into Wallonia, Cluster Tweed, into the renewable energy cluster in Iceland. I could take you into other places in Norway. I could take you into a number of places in Spain, in the Basque Country, in northern Spain, in Madrid, or in Catalonia, competency centered on Barcelona, with over 10 years of experience in developing their cluster. I could take you into the renewable energy cluster in Hamburg, or in Colorado, or in Lombardy in Italy, centered on Milan. All initiatives that have some commonality with what you're doing in Canberra, with what you're doing with SERREE. And a key question for what you're doing is, what are we doing that's different to these other places? And if you're looking at taking your competencies beyond the greater Canberra region, beyond Australia, it's not going to be renewable competencies in general. It's going to be some deep specialization. And maybe part of your journey is in covering what is that specialization that specialization that enables Canberra-based companies, regional-based companies to gain a foothold on a global scale. Cluster development is not easy at times. It's not about everybody hunting as a pack all the time. It's about tensions between stakeholders. It's about relationships, particularly between small businesses and other actors, small businesses coming in with innovation. It's about the small guys, the Davids, being able to work with the big guys. And we need the big guys because often they've got market clout, perhaps international presence. But we also need the small guys who perhaps are coming in with innovative solutions, new solutions. But what I see in many parts of the world is the Davids and the Goliaths don't talk that well. And often it needs a neutral corner, be it a cluster manager, be it an RDA, be it perhaps, John, what you were talking about. It needs some mechanism that helps incentivize, helps introduce the Davids and Goliaths, helps them work through where really are their common agendas, where together we can make a difference. Taking you here to a book, The Triumph of the City, and I want to make this point about innovation and geography. As this book says, innovation clusters because ideas cross corridors and streets more easily than continents and seas. And yes, the technology that we're using, the Zoom technology, does help to replace the travel that we've all got used to. But it's no substitute to actually sitting down, having a beer, brainstorming, feeding off each other, learning from each other. And I sense as the dust settles, as we return to a new type of normal, we're still going to see this tight geography of innovation, the tight geography of innovation that I see in a place like Aarhus, or as we see in Silicon Valley. And it's a geography of innovation that is helped by hubs. It's helped by having precincts, technology parks, incubators, co-working spaces. These are all important. But the title that I've got here, Cluster Infrastructures, I'm underlining the S, the plural, because in particular, yes, it's the physical infrastructure that is specialized. Perhaps maybe it's common user facilities that relate to solo, or common user facilities that relate to different types of energy generation. It's the physical infrastructure. It is also the knowledge infrastructure, and the knowledge infrastructure that comes perhaps from the university, the Polytech, but maybe also the high schools in the region, where kids at high schools are going on the sort of projects, the walkabouts that Liz talked about, and feeling and sensing that, ooh, maybe there's a career option for me here. There's something exciting going on in the region. It's the knowledge infrastructure, and it is the social infrastructure. The connections, connecting all the dots, connecting the businesses with the training institutions. What I see particularly in Australia is a lot of interest, a lot of fascination in hubs, precincts, the physical infrastructure. And without being too unkind, it is the relatively easy bit. It's the relatively quick fix. It's the bit that particularly appeals to politicians because they're more likely to see results within the time frame of a politician. But the hard slog in economic development, the hard slog in cluster development, is actually the social infrastructure, connecting the dots, building the local team. And part of building that team is the board. And Liz talked about businesses, government, academia. And I think of these three in a common term used around the world, triple helix. And I'm highlighting a board here that is particularly business driven and moves at the speed of business. but with relevant government agencies, relevant academic institutions, such as perhaps SERREE, such as perhaps the university participating. A board that is a voluntary coalition of preferred leaders and leaders who integrate their knowledge and perspectives, integrate perhaps knowledge that comes in part from the marketplace with knowledge that comes from R&D, and able at times to have strong debates, hard debates about what does this mean in terms of how do we move forward. So able progressively to work as the team as trust is developed. It's a board with active governance, and I see some boards that are more the spectators rather than truly the who's who, the people who really want to make a difference within that particular cluster. A few elements of warning on a board. I see some boards that are a little different from an old boys club, particularly if there's public funding, government funding, but don't want to change what they're doing. I see some boards that are second level managers. It's not CEOs of businesses, but second level, and it's not heads of departments at a university or at a government agency. I see some boards that are full of association officials or people that parachute in from beyond the geographic region of that cluster. I see too many boards where most of the folk come from the same university, the same technical background, the same gender. We need boards which are a mix of folk, which are folk that are seeking to integrate. Folk, as the title on this book is saying, boards that are able to draw on the wisdom of the crowd, the wisdom around the board table and the wisdom that is beyond. We need the disagreement, we need the contest. We need to work through what really are the priorities. I'll make a few comments about a cluster manager. And I like the way this lady in Sweden describes her role. I'm a junction box. I'm a bit, as Liz was describing, I know who's who in the zoo here. And I'm a port for projects. I know where there are common pressure points, where there are common opportunities. And it's the projects that are the cluster's engine room. Liz took us into a few of those projects, and typically in a clustering initiative, there's a broad range that might relate to training, might relate to internationalization, might relate to investment attraction, might relate to R&D, new technologies. Broad range, and not necessarily everybody is rowing in the same boat. There could be projects that are actually competing with each other. That's healthy. Let's suck it and see. Let's test which works. And then being able to recombine, being able to adjust as results come through. Important, I find, with clustering initiatives to focus on the opportunities to go where there's passion. And it's projects with, not for, the cluster stakeholders. And projects particularly where a cluster manager type person, based on their knowledge of the key players, is bringing people together around a common agenda. You may be familiar with Food Innovation Australia. Let me use this as an example. It's one of the industry growth centres, one of the 6 or 7. They launched a cluster competition a few years ago, in part saying, there's a limit to what we can do at the national level. We need to come down. They launched a competition. One of the winners coming through from Tasmania is Fermentation Tasmania. It's a food cluster, and the specialization there, fermentation technology. I like the way in which Food Industry Australia says clustering accelerates growth. It's connecting the dots, is helping businesses, support organizations work as a team around a particular specialization. So as I finish, let me share with you 4 key points. I see successful clustering initiatives centered on teamwork that in turn is centered on a regional specialization. And at times, it takes time for that regional specialization to come through. It is about businesses in the lead. And typically, it is a business person who chairs a clustering initiative, in part to ensure that it moves at the speed of business. But it's not just businesses. A cluster association, a cluster structure is not an industry association. It is different. It is public agencies there in support, and public agencies that are particularly able to listen to what are the needs of those businesses and how do we better align, how do we better engage around those particular needs. And by public agencies, again, I'm thinking about agencies at the 3 levels that you have in Australia. It's at the Commonwealth level, it's the state level, at the ACT level, it's the more regional level with the economic development agencies. But it is also aligning the knowledge institutions. And any internationally competitive cluster has knowledge underpinning. And again, a question for you in the Canberra region is, well, what's our specialization? Are we just adapters and integrators of other knowledge? Or are we truly a go-to place on an Australian-wide or even a global scale? Are we truly a go-to place for specific knowledge, as Iceland is for geothermal, and as I sense Aarhus is when it comes to wind energy? That's what I want to share, what I wanted to share with you. It is about hunting as a pack, and through hunting as a pack, being able to go after bigger fish. And bigger fish, I sense, not just in Australia, but on a global scale. Michael, thank you. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Ufil. That was brilliant, very clear and concise. And you're summarising massive effort, massive combinations of organisations in different regions around the world. Well, I think what you point out is there's 2 stages, there's 2 levels to this, the physical and the relationship part, which is, as everyone knows, is the toughest part about building trust and that, will I get something out of this? As a few questions that came to my mind, and just to remind people to use the messaging app to the right. It's on the bottom of your screen under chat. You want to enter a question or 2 under that, please do so. I suppose the question I have for you, Ufil, is you mentioned big theme there was that relationship management work. Building a hub and taking a hub to another level, from my experience, which is very limited compared to yours, is that the hubs mature to a certain level, they'll gain a lot, and then they'll need to kind of keep maturing, keep elevating to another level to go deeper. In our case, you've mentioned specialisation. I'll leave that probably for panel because there's experts, a lot of people with a lot of knowledge about local capability here, and we'll defer to that. But what in your mind is that personal relationship? What are some of the key tricks you could say or advice you'd give to hub managers to build the relationship? There's some obvious ones, of course, I've mentioned, but what have you seen? Can you point to examples also from other industries that could help us here in the region?
Let me make a comment first on the word hub. And the word hub is used quite a bit around Australia. If you're talking about a hub in Europe or in Canada, they would be thinking about a physical precinct, they would be thinking about buildings. If you really want to link in internationally, then the word cluster is a term that is recognized and used globally. And I would hope part of what you're doing as you continue to develop SERREE is to link in with other clustering initiatives around the world. And to link in accepting that, yes, at times we're competing with those other places, but we can also collaborate. So a culture of co-opetition between your competencies and other places around the world. But co-opetition, again, and coming back to your question here, it needs to be centered on, well, what are we darn good at doing here? What is our point or points? And it could well be more than one. What are our specializations in the region? And perhaps this will come through in the later discussion, or maybe it will come through with a bit more legwork and a bit more time. And sometimes I see clusters that start fairly broad and say, actually, we need to understand over time, yep, we're good at this, and we're good at that, and we're good at that. Those are our core specializations. Now, let's focus on those. We will have some umbrella activities that reach across, but these are the particularly the specializations where we're reaching across Australia, where, to use a term I used a moment ago, we are recognized as a go-to place on a global scale. And a difficulty for any place in this world is, where are we that go-to place? And unless you become a go-to place, then essentially you end up as the receiving end of the knowledge of the companies that come from elsewhere in the world. I was pleased to see in one of Liz's slides that Vestas is part of the initiative. That's great. But now, where are Vestas going to draw on technology, going to draw on knowledge from the Canberra region that perhaps they feed into their global network? So for Vestas, part of what you've got in Canberra perhaps is a center of excellence, a go-to place where Vestas is saying, yeah, we're not doing everything in Aarhus. That particular activity, that particular knowledge, hey, the learning center is down under in Canberra.
Thank you. I might open it up just with my taking a risk that we might get some feedback. If anybody wants to ask a direct question, please unmute yourself, and now's a good opportunity. Otherwise, we will move on, and there'll be more chance to talk and ask questions of E4 in panel as well in a little while. So if there's any questions directly now, if not, we'll move on. Okay, you've done too good a job, E4. That's terrific. Thank you. And we'll now move to the next section. This is with Jean McGlynn. Jean is from the ACT government. He started as Executive Director of Climate Change and Sustainability in the ACT in July 2018. In this role, he looks after a range of policies and programs to ensure that the ACT meets its emission reduction goals, while improving the environment and helping citizens make the transition to a net zero emissions future. Bearing in mind, for those who don't know, that the objective, the target is net zero emissions by 2045, which is extremely demanding and way ahead of other jurisdictions, as we always have been in the ACT in regard to renewables. Prior to this, Jean worked as a consultant for more than 20 years in the Australian government, as well for the Australian government in climate change and energy policy. So it's a huge pedigree and background in the policy point of view. He's also worked in the OECD in Paris and the Energy Charter Secretariat in Brussels. So Jean, thank you for participating, and we look forward to hearing this presentation on policy and where it's going in the ACT. Jean, are you muted? You are. Good.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. And hopefully people are seeing the slides there. I would like to say that after Liz's presentation, I felt really bad that there's not a applause application on this this platform, because that just seemed like something that would be, I really wanted to do that. So thanks, Liz, for all that work. I think it was quite impressive what SERREE has done in a pretty short period of time, really, and we'll continue to do in a different form. I'd also just like to start by acknowledging that I'm meeting today on the land of the Ngunnawal people, the traditional custodians of our land. All of you who are meeting in Australia somewhere are meeting on Aboriginal land, and it's interesting because we are talking about technologies of the future, but we also need to not forget that we draw on the knowledge of the oldest living culture on Earth that's helped us get to where we are, and we need to keep drawing on that to be successful. I want to go through a super quick run through of the ACT climate change strategy. I suspect many of you are familiar with some of it, but it does provide a bit of context, and then talk a little bit more about the sustainable energy policy that the ACT government is developing, just as which hopefully will help feed into this discussion. So I assume everyone on this call knows why we need to mitigate climate change emissions. There's a budget, and over on the right here you see the fact that we have increasing evidence that some of the tipping points around the globe are on the potential of now tipping. So in fact, if anything, our climate change challenge in terms of mitigation is getting stronger, not less. But we also have an adaptation issue. Anyone who's been in Canberra or probably anywhere in the world for the last little while will know what how the climate is changing in quite dramatic ways. And bushfires, hailstorms, heat, drought, they're all happening. It's not a thing for the future. It's now happening, and it's just a question of how much more we're going to see of that as we go forward. So that's the kind of very broad policy context in which the government released its climate change strategy and living infrastructure plan back in September of last year. It's basically a follow-on from previous climate change strategies and takes us forward primarily for the next 5 years. And in developing their strategies, we're trying to meet those three objectives. There's a mitigation objective, which is really important and where renewable energy plays its most significant role. But the government also needs to invest in adaptation and resilience for the community to make sure we are ready for climate change. And also there's a very strong focus on just transition, that the energy sector, the way we consume and use energy is changing, and we need to make sure that all households and all workers are able to participate in that change and that we don't leave people behind in doing that. So there's a range of things that the government's trying to achieve in its strategies. So in terms of the targets that have been set, as mentioned, we have a 2045 zero emissions target, which is the thing that people most talk about. But along the way, there are also a number of interim targets, and that's to make sure that the government stays on track and that there's a test. It's not just a sort of often the never, never approach. First of those targets is 2020, when we are to be 40% below 1990 levels, and we'll meet that target this year. And the key reason we've gotten to that target is the 100% renewable electricity target through the renewable energy auctions that, again, I assume most people are reasonably familiar with, where we purchased renewable electricity from around Australia to supply our needs over time. But we do now have these other targets for the next few years, and this climate change strategy now is mostly focused on getting to 2025, but also making sure we're taking the steps necessary to get to those longer targets at the same time. And what it means is that from 2020, from this year, now that we have 100% renewables, there are no electricity sector emissions in the ACT, and so our focus turns to the other two really big sectors, the blue one there, which is transport, which is almost 2/3 of our emissions, a bit over 60%, and the gray one, which is natural gas use. And so the strategy is very strongly focused on, again, short-term and long-term approaches to address those uses. And just to give a sense of how challenging the 2025 target is, this is just one indicative scenario that's in the strategy that talks about what would be needed broadly to get to our 2025 target, which is about a 17 to 33% reduction from 2020 levels. And it's pretty massive. We're talking about shifting 30% of our car kilometers to carbon neutral travel, whether that be light rail based light rail based on renewable electricity, electrification of vehicles, whether they're buses or cars, development that helps people reduce their transport needs by not having to travel, but also using walking and cycling. But 30% is the kind of change that I don't know if any, it would be unprecedented to achieve that sort of change. At the same time, that would also have to be accompanied by quite significant changes in natural gas in terms of limiting new gas developments, which we've now done through an interim planning variation that means that no longer will new estate developments be required to connect to gas. So at least there's not that mandatory requirement there, but there's still possibilities for those sorts of things. But also switching a lot of households and some businesses to all electric. And that also is a challenging thing. There is a trend toward that, but we're going to have to accelerate that trend. And we need to get over the fact that for years we told people that gas was the environmentally preferred measure, whereas now in the ACT, it's electricity. And if I think about this in a notional sense, the 100% renewable target continues to sort of underpin a lot of what we do. It facilitates zero emissions transport. It facilitates the switch out of gas to electricity and all those other things. So that has to continue. We've switched from carbon neutral government to zero emissions government to move away from using offsets as ways to meet our targets. continue to have an energy efficiency program, which will need to continue and adapt as we go along. But if I look up at things like, we do have a zero emissions vehicle action plan where the first focus is on government vehicles, but we'll need to have further stages that take us out beyond government vehicles. And in terms of this gas shift, there is a commitment to move away from natural gas over the next 25 years, which is a massive change. In the short term, there are people who can shift to electricity and other options in the in a relatively marginal way, but we will need to figure out a way to get to a much bigger shift out of natural gas, whether that's hydrogen or electrification or biogas, but it has very significant implications for potential infrastructure decisions in a territory. So that's kind of the climate change strategy background. Then in terms of the sustainable energy policy, this is something that's been worked on over the last year or so. Hopefully many of you will have been involved in the discussions around it. I hoped we'd have a chance to actually, by now we'd have it finished. Because of COVID, things have been delayed a bit, but the government is still in the late stages of considering this. So I just want to talk through, I guess, some of the themes and what we've heard through those public consultations that will inform where we go next. So the first one is about social inclusion. So it's not just about the technology or the economics of it. We need to make sure that the energy system in the end works for the people who live here. And we heard a lot of issues around making sure that consumers have much better information and understanding of their energy consumption so that they can become more empowered consumers. It's a complicated world. People struggle with understanding their tariffs, and as a result, they sometimes make bad decisions, and so we need to help them do better with that. And again, same sort of theme that we need to keep to make sure that low-income and disadvantaged households continue to share in the benefits that our energy systems deliver, and so we need to have some specific focus on them. Second theme is around economic development, and this is a recognition that the ACT hasn't been a leader in renewable energy progression simply for environmental reasons, although those are very important, but it's also been an important part of our economic development. It's part of the knowledge industry approach that the ACT government is pursuing and has some strengths in. And through the renewable energy auctions, for example, each of those auction winners was required to provide certain industry development support. And through that, our estimate is that about $500 million of economic activity will come to the ACT through those industry development activities over the next 20 years or so. So it's a significant part of it. And we've seen it across a whole range of areas, including workforce planning and skills training, where the CIT has developed its renewable centers of excellence. And there will be new needs for training and skills in the future. Some in things like electric vehicles. Hydrogen is an area that will need some further skills training. Understanding integrated systems and how you build integrated systems. So there's a lot of those sorts of needs that will need to come. And there needs to be better, strong links between the research institutions that we have, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I think this is where the discussion around the SERREE and the hubs have come from, that we need to make sure that as we meet our climate change and other energy goals, we're also meeting our economic development goals. And we want to build those two things together. The third theme in the sustainable energy policy is technology and innovation, which again, obviously is extremely relevant to the discussions we've been having today. There's a couple of themes that came out through the discussions. One was that there's a sense that we don't have as much data as we would like to have in terms of what people's current energy use patterns and supply patterns are, that would allow businesses to develop tailored solutions or general policy solutions to meet those needs. So that's something that we need to do, and we'll be looking at. And the ACT has developed a reputation as a living laboratory. Living laboratory approach for innovative trials. So AEMO was at developing some new regulatory approaches and is now looking at the ACT as a place where it might try out some things to look at how we can respond to the changing energy environment that we all live in. So that's an important part of what we need to do. And it's interesting, when Aoife was talking about this issue of where do we specialize, it's an interesting issue which we really should talk about some more. And I think one of the things that the ACT does specialize in is being very adaptive and agile in new technology approaches and new regulatory approaches. And it's perhaps more diffuse than a specific technology, but it may be an area that that the ACT does develop and keep a particular strength in. And the final area of the sustainable energy policy is environmental sustainability, climate change, but also broader environmental sustainability. And one of the things we heard there was that the ACT's 100% renewables gets a lot of attention, but we need to make sure we don't lose the focus on energy efficiency. It's still usually the most cost-effective option for households and businesses to reduce their energy costs. We do have an energy efficiency improvement scheme program. We do have information support for households and businesses, but we need to make sure that we continue to strengthen and develop those. And again, understanding the role of natural gas. There is no role for natural gas in a zero emissions future. And so we are starting to do some serious work on both the short-term and long-term approaches to how we move out of natural gas. And again, there's three broad pathways: biogas, hydrogen, electrification. They all have their advantages and disadvantages in different applications, but we want to make sure we do some very serious analysis over the next few years so that we can make the right big infrastructure decisions to get us to that zero emissions outcome in the best way. And again, underlying all of this, the 100% renewable electricity supply needs to continue. We've recently held the latest auction for to make sure that we have enough renewable electricity to continue to have 100% renewables, and the results of that will be available over the next couple of months. I just say that we've been very pleased with how that process has gone so far. So in terms of the next steps, as I indicated, I had hoped by now we would have this policy out. We have had some delays, as there have been for COVID reasons right across all the things that we do, but we'd hope to have that out soon so that we can then take that next step in terms of how we deliver this sustainable, affordable, and reliable energy that that everybody needs. So that's just a quick run through of a little bit of climate change and where the sustainable energy policy is up to, and I really look forward to further discussions. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Gene. That was terrific. Very easy to understand. It's a complex area, and sometimes when you see things in a PowerPoint and when it's well explained, the cloud's clear and you can get a good picture. We might move straight into panel, but before we do that, I'll just add a bit of a bio on Simon Corbell, who's been listening in attentively and has been mentioned at the beginning by Ross. So he'll be on panel with joining with John before and Jean. Simon has more than 2 decades of senior experience in public policy leadership, governance and implementation. He was the Victorian Renewable Energy Advocate, and from 2008 to 2016 was the Deputy Chief Minister and Minister for the Environment and Climate Change for the ACT. His advocacy for a strong climate change policy for Canberra saw the ACT achieve national and international recognition as the best practice jurisdiction in renewable energy. He's widely recognised as a leader in the space. He's currently adjunct professor at the University of Canberra, an honorary associate professor at ANU, and he's also a patron of the Smart Energy Council. So we're very, very happy to have him on board and participating here as somebody who was involved in the genesis of SERREE, but also somebody who's critical to taking renewable energy and forward. So Simon, if you perhaps wanted to just start off the panel as you haven't had a chance to speak alone, just maybe a bit of feedback on what you're hearing and anything else you want to say, because this is panel after the other speakers and open questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael, and congratulations to both RGA, ACT and SERREE for putting this forum on today. And can I first of all extend my heartfelt congratulations and thanks for all of the very hard work that Liz Veitch and her colleagues at SERREE did over the past decade. It really was quite an extraordinary effort and was critical, I think, in developing momentum in the opportunities that existed in the ACT economy and the broader regional economy for renewable energy development. So thank you, Liz, for all of the work you did and all the work that your colleagues, Craig and others, did as well. it's been a great discussion so far, and I think from my perspective, I'd really like to reflect on a couple of key issues that I see moving forward. Clearly, there is a need to reboot the SERREE model and to build on the work that has been done to date. When SERREE was started and when the ACT first started its journey towards 100% renewables and all of the associated programs around that, both in terms of community-led renewables initiatives as well as economic development initiatives, we really were ahead of the curve as a jurisdiction. There weren't many other, indeed there were no other, outside of perhaps South Australia, there weren't other large jurisdictions in the country talking about renewable energy and the transition to a zero emissions future as a key economic opportunity, or indeed were taking substantive action in terms of their own carbon abatement. So we really were ahead of the curve, and running the reverse auction programs drew both national and international attention to the market opportunities that the ACT contracts presented. And that drew both large businesses into the ACT who perhaps would have never contemplated the ACT before. And it also allowed established local businesses to grow their presence in the national renewable energy sector. So the two that really stand out to me there are first of all Neoen, the French renewable energy developer, one of the largest renewable energy developers globally. Their second largest office presence outside of their headquarters in Paris is here in Canberra. And it's a direct result of the commitments they made to establish their operations presence here in Canberra from having won a reverse auction contract with the ACT government. The other great example, of course, is the Canberra-based WinLab, who were quite influential actually in helping me and the government at the time devise the way we engaged in the broader national electricity market. And they have grown their presence here in Canberra at a time when perhaps they would have otherwise thought about relocating to a larger metropolitan centre. So they have both been great success stories. But since all that time, everyone else is now caught up with the ACT. So you look at New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, even Western Australia, Northern Territory and Tasmania, they all are heavily focused on the economic opportunities that are coming about through the rapid cost reductions in electricity generation from renewable sources. So we now as a jurisdiction have to think very carefully about how do we position in this new market environment. We are still considered leaders and innovators, particularly in the knowledge space, particularly in the research and development space, and particularly in the startup space. And that reflects our broader knowledge-based economy focus. But I think it is fair to say that the sheer scale and weight and gravity that the largest jurisdictions can bring to both utility scale development, but also to manufacturing capability, and also to linking clean energy with heavy industry, means that we as a jurisdiction, a small jurisdiction, have to work harder and smarter than ever before. So one of the things I'd like to be thinking about as we move forward and with this transition of SERREE from RDA across the Smart Energy Council is that we leverage the connections and the networks that exist in the new host body to reach out to national and international investors. There are literally trillions of dollars of investment now growing in international markets for zero emissions and low carbon investment opportunities. We have to make sure that as a jurisdiction we leverage and bring in some of that commitment. And we have to move beyond thinking about ourselves as just a small region, trying to find our place in the broader national market. We have to think about ourselves as an influential thought leader that can connect to global markets and to global investment markets in particular. So I would strongly encourage both the ACT government, the Smart Energy Council and other participants in the new SERREE moving forward to be thinking about how do we bring those relationships to bear into Canberra? How do we make sure, for example, that the World Bank thinks about opportunities here in Canberra? How do we think about how the Green Climate Fund thinks about opportunities here in Canberra and the region? How do we think about some of the big private investors, the very large global investors such as BlackRock or some of the other global investment funds who have specifically established new mandates for low carbon solutions, both in terms of technology, ideas and deployment. So these are the key opportunities for us moving forward. As a jurisdiction, I think as Jean McGlynn highlighted, we are good at innovating and demonstrating ideas at scale. We've done that with renewables, we're doing that with electric vehicles, we're doing it in a range of other sectors. How do we leverage that capacity to be a test bed to draw in investment and further opportunities to innovate? So I guess just a few thoughts from my perspective, Michael, and look forward to having a broader conversation.
Thanks very much, Simon. I'll just throw it open to other members of the panel to begin with, just maybe to respond a little bit to some of Simon's ideas there. International investment attraction and facilitation. We didn't mention, Liz did mention that we work closely with Austrade, who do the investment work as well. That's something, a line of thought. So John, Grimes, Jean McGlynn and I4, you're open to express a view and we get a bit of a debate going, hopefully. Thanks.
Well, Michael, I'm John Grimes here, so I'm very pleased to make a comment. The thing that really sparked in my thinking, I thought E4's presentation was particularly thought-provoking, and that is, you know, what's your regional competitive advantage? What is it that kind of sets you apart? And thinking about that also in the context of Simon's words, what occurs to me that we already have a globally significant think tank here in the form of the Australian National University. So there's a couple of particular initiatives coming out of the work that they're doing. One is around pumped hydro expertise. So really setting an agenda and sort of being a regional and in fact a global centre of excellence around pumped hydro, the opportunities that affords. The second one that occurs to me is the work being done in terms of the Asian Renewable Hub. So positioning Australia as an economic superpower who's in the business of harnessing abundant, really cheap renewable energy as a competitive advantage then to drive heavy industry. So things like metal smelting, aluminium smelting, value adding in terms of steel and other minerals and materials. How do we re-vitalise the whole Australian economy underpinned by this work? So given that that expertise already exists, I think we should be teasing some of these themes out, thinking about the industry players that are prepared to make strategic investments in kind of understanding this better, and then harnessing the intellectual capital that exists here in the ACT to kind of leverage and expand upon kind of that work that's already been done. So that's what kind of occurred to me just as a thought bubble as people have been speaking.
John, I'm getting excited when you talk about pump hydro. I was getting excited when Jean talked about, we seem to have an edge in new regulatory approaches. And a key part of that is thinking that, yes, it would be, how do we attract attention from the World Bank? Because it's not attracting attention in general. If the World Bank is looking for geothermal know-how, my guess is they're firstly going to look at Iceland. They're not going to come to Canberra. And a question for you is, what are your deep specializations? And how do we more effectively, firstly, build that team, but secondly, blow the trumpet and tell the world, this is where we're a knowledge center. This is where we are a go-to place. And maybe it's not necessarily a go-to place for the hardware, but it's a go-to place for the knowledge. that people can interpret in different places in different parts of the world. Love the pump hydro bit. And I sense part of your journey is working through what are these different specializations. And I sense it's not just one. And if I can just make one more point, encourage you as the ACT government, put pressure on your local companies. Put pressure on your local companies where the local companies are squealing and saying, I don't know how to deliver that at the moment. Because part of what you want to be on is at the leading edge, the bleeding edge, where businesses are being forced to be innovative, to develop new solutions, to firstly meet, in a sense, your test market in Canberra, and then perhaps develop the capabilities to take that globally.
Can I say on that? I mean, I also found your presentation extremely interesting and provocative, and I think this issue of what is the specialty is exactly the right question to answer. I guess I will disagree with Simon Corbell on one thing, and I do that under the risk of questioning anything someone of his stature says. But I think the ACT does have a different environment than the rest of Australia and a lot of the world, in that we have gotten to the 100% renewables, and therefore the kinds of issues we're now trying to solve are the ones that other jurisdictions are going to get to in 7 or 10 years. So we're trying to figure out how to get to out of natural gas, trying to figure out how to make our transport system fully integrated with electricity. And I think that means that we're dealing with a lot of these integration and policy regulatory sort of issues ahead of other jurisdictions. I don't know that pure technology is where the ACT is ever going to have its strongest comparative advantage. But it's in how you integrate different things into the market, how we regulate the electricity market in a way that recognizes that transport is now part of the stationary market, how we build batteries into the system in a way that reflects their capabilities and benefits in terms of the marketplace. And one of the other things the ANU has is, I think, the best battery research program, certainly in the country, possibly in the world, and has some focus on technology, but its stronger focus is on, again, regulatory approaches and integration issues. And I think that's where the ACT has and can continue to be extremely strong.
Yeah, I certainly agree with Jean that our strength isn't in technology per se, it's in technology integration and the knowledge around that. And if you look at things like battery vehicle to grid integration technologies and so on, which the ACT government's been strongly supporting with the program at the ANU, for example, is a good example of that. But I think the point I'm making, Jean, is that we are actually now, back in the pack, I have to say. I mean, yes, we're 100% renewables, but we're not 100% renewables in terms of running a 100% renewables grid with all the firming, dispatchable qualities of that grid, which other jurisdictions are having to address. And that's because of where we are physically located in the national electricity market. And I think it is fair to say that other jurisdictions are pushing very hard on where are the opportunities for hydrogen in terms of displacing natural gas in domestic gas distribution networks. Lots of other jurisdictions and other cities, Brisbane, Sydney, Adelaide, all looking at electrification of public transport. So I guess my key point is this is a race. This is a race. And in the ACT, my concern is that we've become a bit too inward looking again and going, well, we're doing good stuff and not so much paying attention to what's happening in the big jurisdictions that are actually attracting global investment flows. And the ACT isn't sufficiently doing that. So I think we need to be hungrier. I think to take E4's point, we do need to blow our own trumpet more again. I remember when I was minister, I used to annoy my then department a lot by insisting that they sign up to different global initiatives and global compacts and so on. But the reason I did that was to get attention for what we were doing, because I knew that what we were doing was globally significant. But it's all very well to be doing amazing things, but if no one knows that you're doing them, then you're not really getting full value from the effort you're putting in. So from my perspective, we do need to be more aggressive in that way again, and I think we need to be more aggressive in terms of our relationships with investment markets in particular. I think really where we do need to go now as a jurisdiction is to further build on those strengths, but also build on the relationships and the networks with other jurisdictions, with external parties overseas. I think these are really what's going to make a difference for us, so that we can build on the strengths of our knowledge-based institutions, of smart startups like Reposit is a great example of that, and really build on that capacity and show what we are doing, which is truly leading in many respects.
You have the opportunity to surrender and accept that essentially we're going to be an importer of technology, an importer of know-how, be it from Aarhus, be it from Iceland, be it from New Zealand, be it from wherever. Or you've got the opportunity to say, actually, we want to be a global player.
And maybe
finding the space for that global player. One of the clues when I look at a place and ask the question of what are your specializations, one clue I look is what's going on at ANU. Where in ANU do we particularly attract graduate students, postgraduate students? Are people coming here from around the world to do their PhDs in pump hydro, to do their PhDs in regulatory approaches in a sustainable environment? Where do we have the deep knowledge?
Or also, where do we have the political will, Ethel? So, the gas industry has done a fantastic job really perpetuating what is, well, frankly, a lie, that natural gas is a clean fuel. Natural gas is not a clean fuel. And so if the ACT's challenge is to really get the next level of emissions reductions, we're going to need to look at things like fuel switching for natural gas. So that's actually quite forward thinking. Other jurisdictions are not thinking about that yet. But I can imagine a program in the ACT where you demonstrate clearly to people how by shifting to induction cooktops, how shifting to heat pump hot water systems, how shifting to electric, air and space heating systems, all powered by the ACT's 100% renewable energy, right, makes a massive difference in terms of the domestic load for gas, and actually setting some targets to really drive down and make that real. I think you'd be doing a service not just for the ACT, but in fact for the whole world. So I think there are opportunities definitely here.
I think perhaps to reflect on this, we have to take advantage of our city-state scale, and we talk about that a lot in the ACT. But it nevertheless rings true that our city-state scale is a great advantage for us. One level of government in terms of the governance at a state and local level, large enough to have impact, large enough to trial, but not too big to be too complex and too hard to do. So there are good opportunities for us there, but whether it's in terms of the integration of storage, distributed generation and storage into the grid, whether it's in terms of the research that's happening on development of pumped hydro solutions, whether we should leverage further our commitments we've got in terms of hydrogen supply for vehicles, and think about how we can actually develop direct hydrogen manufacture here at scale, rather than just importing it from some other place. There are opportunities like that for us to think about as well. So there are, I think, plenty of great opportunities, but relationships, I think is critical. And we have to look outwards more than we have over the past few years, and think about how we engage with those big markets that are looking for innovative, smart opportunities, and letting people know what we are doing, which is really quite remarkable on hydrogen gas networks, on electrification of transport. These are big, significant steps, but we need to tell people about them.
Thanks for that. Look, just quickly, if anybody from the floor wants to unmute and ask any questions or make a comment, now's the time to do so. Otherwise, we'll might look to wrap up. So anybody has a question there or comment from outside the panel, you'll need to unmute. Okay. Note or on that silence, unless it's a technical issue, we'll look to wrap up. Look, thank you very much, everybody. I think some of the points that came out of that panel there were gems, and certainly seems a goal which I'm sure the Smart Energy Council, ACT Government, and others will look to exploit and to extract maximum benefit from and put a lot more thought into. I did want to mention RDA ACT is moving on to develop a new hub cluster in food, and a big part of that, when you look at best practice around the world, is integration of renewable energy, food production and transport, and water. And those three speaking to each other in a systemised way. So we are still, hope to say, very much involved in renewable energy in that terms of those applications in that food and clean water and recycling space going forward. But thanks to all our speakers and everyone that signed on. We had a large gathering. I think we peaked well over 60, and some of those were groups in conference rooms. So we're very happy with that, and look forward to any feedback you want to provide us. Let us know if you had issues or problems, and over to you for taking this industry forward, and especially over to the Smart Energy Council.
Michael, a quick comment coming in, if I may, as a distant contributor. You've got a coalition of the willing here. The fact that 50 people have stayed with us for this session. Love the way John and was saying, let's bite the bullet here. And encourage you, John, when you're thinking about different areas of specialization, think about how do we build an action team around those? How do we energize around those? Almost little mini cluster action teams that could even be competing with each other. We're not hugging each other all the way. It is building this culture of co-opetition, but let's engage, let's empower others. Let's together build a more sustainable future. Thank you, Michael, for inviting me to join in. Thank you.
You're on mute there, I think, Michael.
Unmute. Thanks very much, everybody. Yep, for that, and we'll look forward to where things go. And stay safe. Thank you.